Bioshock 2. Prologue. The lights of Rapture glowed warmly as Subject Delta patrolled the pristine walkways. The underwater utopia was still new, and a genetically modified plague that would one day transform its citizens into horrific splicers was but a whisper of a nightmare yet to come. Delta felt the small hand of his little sister Eleanor slip into his massive glove. She looked up at him with awe through the porthole of his diving helmet. "Mr. B, can we go see the fishies?" she asked. Delta nodded, his heart swelling with love and protectiveness for his little one. He lumbered slowly as Eleanor skipped beside him, singing a bright nursery rhyme. The shadowy horrors that would swallow them both were still far off on the horizon. For now, Delta lived in the moment, content to simply keep his little sister safe. Chapter 1. It was the early golden days of the underwater objectivist paradise, before the political strife and genetic tinkering began tearing at the foundations. The visionary Andrew Ryan had built Rapture as a refuge from tyranny, a place where scientists could experiment without restraint, artists could create without censorship, and industrialists like he could profit without taxes and regulation. Subject Delta stood watch outside the laboratory as Dr. Yi Suchong and Dr. Bridget Tenenbaum conducted their plasmids experiments. He could hear Eleanor laughing as she played inside. She was the happiest little sister in Rapture, and Delta was the proudest big daddy. Later, as they walked along the promenade, Eleanor said, "Mr. B, I can't wait until I grow up. Rapture is so beautiful. I want to be a doctor here and make everybody happy." Delta's heart swelled with joy at his little one's innocence. But in the shadowy corners, the first ugly signs of strife were beginning to fester. Rapture's ideals depended on absolute freedom, with no compassion for those who suffered. Ayahuasca, the first splicer, was proof of the horrors to come. But Delta saw only the dazzling lights of the city. As long as he had Eleanor, nothing else mattered. Chapter 2. Delta awoke with a splitting headache, his vision blurry. He looked around in confusion at the crumbling walls covered in algae and rust. This was not the pristine Rapture he remembered. He rose unsteadily to his feet, unsure of who or where he was. Faint memories floated just out of reach: a smiling young girl, tea parties and teddy bears, the joy of protecting his little sister. But her name eluded him. Stumbling through corridors choked with debris, Delta came across a grisly scene: the mangled corpse of a big daddy, viciously torn apart. Shocked, Delta examined the gaping hole ripped open in the big daddy's armored torso. Had the little sister survived such a savage attack? Over a flickering PA system, a placid female voice intoned, "Do not resist Eleanor's salvation. Your life will be measured in how you aid her path, Subject Delta." Eleanor. Delta's little sister was in danger, and he had to find her. But who was this voice commanding him? And what had happened to plunge Rapture into this decaying ruin? Delta didn't know, but he would get answers. Activating his arm drill, he set forth to unravel the mystery. Chapter 3. Delta's first task was equipping himself for the journey ahead. He searched the area, finding basic weapons and plasmids scattered among the rubble. A heavy rivet gun would serve as his main firearm, along with a spear gun for distant targets. Incinerate would provide offensive capabilities, while telekinesis granted manipulation of objects. After modifying his weapons and plasmid reserves at a gene bank, Delta felt stronger. But questions gnawed at his fractured mind. Flickers of memory teased him laughing children, birthday cakes, joyful hugs. Eleanor needed him, that much was certain. The rest would have to wait. Venturing out into the crumbling Kashmir restaurant, Delta was attacked by a horde of splicers, Rapture's human population hideously transformed by atom overdoses. Their crazed laughter and animalistic shrieks echoed through the decaying chambers as they rushed at Delta. But his fireballs and rivets tore through them. Delta walked away unharmed, leaving the splicers as smoking corpses behind him. He would need more than weapons, though. Answers were critical. Somewhere in this ruined metropolis, Eleanor was waiting for him. Delta would tear through hordes of splicers or legions of big daddies to save his little one. Chapter 4. Delta made his way through devastated districts of Rapture, dispatching splicers and looking for clues to his past along the way. Posters and signs for plasmid treatments triggered brief flashes of memory. He had been one of the first prototype Big Daddies. In Triton Cinema, Delta came across projectors still running loop Big Daddy bonding footage. Glimpses of little girls laughing as their protectors tossed them up playfully or presented them with gifts pierced Delta's heart. Had he shared such tender moments with Eleanor? Finally, in Point Prometheus, Delta uncovered the first solid Leda and smashed Gatherer's Garden labeled Little Sister Creation. Horrific realization dawned on him. The Little Sisters had originally been normal young girls, genetically altered and mentally conditioned to extract Adam. His beloved Eleanor might have undergone such monstrous experimentation. Delta's radio crackled to life. "You will not interfere with Eleanor's salvation," the woman intoned coldly once more. Delta's response was a wordless roar of rage. He slammed his drill into the ruined machine, sparks flying as the metal screeched against metal. He would find this woman and make her undo whatever she had done to his little one. Chapter 5. More disturbing evidence emerged as Delta progressed deeper into Rapture's twisted remains. Graffiti scribbled on walls warned, "Lamb eyes watching." Sinister posters depicted a woman with the slogan, "Unity through order." Delta tuned into a working radio and heard a female voice preaching, "You have been told you are special. You are not. Reject the self and embrace the whole." Delta immediately recognized the chillingly calm tone. This was the woman commanding him, the nefarious Sofia Lamb. Finally, Delta uncovered a recording that made his blood turn to ice. "Eleanor has become everything I could have hoped for," Sofia Lamb intoned coolly. "She is the first of a new utopian people, free of individualism and selfish desires. Soon her happiness will be shared by all." Delta let loose an enraged howl. Eleanor's life had been stolen from her, twisted to serve Sofia Lamb's vision of a collectivist dystopia. He would sacrifice anything to free her from such monstrous indoctrination. AMB punished Delta for his outburst, sending security bots to subdue him. But Delta's fury overpowered them all. He would have his vengeance. Chapter 6. As Delta continued his search for Eleanor, he established radio contact with Dr. Tenenbaum, a repentant scientist from his hazy past. She provided guidance on avoiding Sofia's forces and gave Delta a single instruction: find the little ones still stranded. Protect them, as you once protected my Eleanor. Delta soon came across a little sister, vulnerable and alone, but for her decaying Big Daddy protector. Delta's heart ached at the sight of the frightened child. When she cried, "Mr. Bubbles," at the Big Daddy's corpse, Delta made his choice. Sending out a protective gene tonic, he adopted the girl as his own. The little sister trustingly took Delta's hand, guiding him to a hidden vent where she could drain Atom from a mangled splicer corpse. As she happily gathered the precious Atom, Delta stood guard, just as he had long ago with a different little girl. When the sister had finished, Delta carefully extracted the Atom slug from her body, returning her to normal. Though not Eleanor, Delta would keep this child safe, until all the little ones were free from Rapture's horrors. For now, tentative alliance with Tenenbaum was necessary to achieve that goal. Chapter 7. Delta's bond with Eleanor drew him towards Pauper's Drop, a flooded slum district controlled by Sofia Lamb and her cult-like followers. Splicers and security systems menaced Delta's every step. But his determination to find Eleanor pushed him forward. In Skid Row, Delta was ambushed by the Brute Splicer, a massively powerful, hulking monster. The Brute hurled fiery explosives that blasted craters in the ground where Delta had stood seconds before. Whirring his drill furiously, Delta dove behind rubble to avoid the relentless onslaught. As the Brute charged, Delta used telekinesis to send propane tanks flying into its path, then detonated them with Incinerate. The explosion tore the Brute apart, its gurgling roar fading. Delta walked away, his porthole stained with splicer blood. None would stop him from finding Eleanor. Further on, Delta faced swarms of spider splicers scuttling along ceilings and walls, evading his attacks. But propelled by a jet of water, his drill shredded them to bloody bits when they pounced. Delta was slowly carving a path deeper into Rapture's circulatory system, drawing ever closer to the heartbeat of Eleanor. Chapter 8. Rapture had been a shifting sea during Delta's days bonded to Eleanor, divisions widening to great rifts, and finally erupting into civil war. Far-seeing citizens like Tenenbaum had fled early on. But Delta could not abandon his duties. When the first explosions rocked the foundations and screams of terror filled the corridors, Delta tucked a frightened Eleanor under one massive arm and charged out to confront the chaos. It came across a little sister trembling in a side passage, alone and unprotected. Though it went against protocol, Delta scooped her up as well. He could not leave the child to perish. As flaming debris rained down through breached ceilings and corpses littered the walkways, Delta shielded the girls from the destruction, trying to find an escape route. But ahead, hordes of splicers dueled with Ryan's security forces. There was no way out. The city Delta had known was gone, sunken forever. Chapter 9. Evidence of Sofia's insidious indoctrination of Eleanor manifested at every turn. Delta uncovered hidden chambers filled with scribbled paeans to Lamb from her followers, awaiting ritual sacrifice. I give my flesh willingly to unify with the whole. The self must be abolished for the utopian dream. Lamb's vision shall lift us from this fallen place. Recordings left by Sofia herself praised Eleanor as the fulfillment of her life's work. With no grasp of self, freed from fear of death, Eleanor will be the shining beacon who guides our people to oneness. Delta's heart ached at these clues hinting the horrors Eleanor must have endured. He would sow chaos and reap blood until he held her in his arms again. None who had harmed her would be spared his righteous fury. Chapter 10. Journeying through Ryan Amusements, Delta discovered a mysterious park ride called the Push Me Pull You Bathysphere. Entering its cramped confines, Delta suddenly found himself riding along a track passing swirling portals. Through brief glimpses, he could see Eleanor in a deadly dance with the big sisters, agile, acrobatic former little sisters turned into Sofia's enforcers. When the ride stopped, Delta stepped out and immediately had to battle a big sister who leapt from nowhere. Her demented screams and glowing eyes chilled Delta as she slashed with her atom-harvesting needle. But Delta's incinerate turned the tables, roasting her until she fled. Back in the amusement park, Delta realized he had been granted a vision of Eleanor's imprisonment in Persephone. He now understood she was forced to train as Big Sister Enforcer. Anger coursing through him, Delta smashed animatronic figures of splicers. He was coming for her, and no Big Sister would stand in his way. Chapter 11. At last, after battling through legions of splicers and Sofia Lamb's followers, Delta picked up a faint but unmistakable radio signal, Eleanor herself, calling from the depths of Persephone. "Father, if you can hear me, know that I am held captive by the enemy of all you strove to build. Please, find a way to save me. Only you can guide us both to freedom." Delta nearly sank to his knees at the sound of that beloved voice. Dim visions swirled of leaning over her crib, listening to her giggle and coo as an infant. He had found his little one, but now the true struggle to reach her would begin. More disjointed memories surfaced, Eleanor's tiny hand in his, her cheerful voice piping about princess tea parties, the joyful smile on her face when Delta presented her with the teddy bear Mr. Bubbles. Every brutal battle had been for this moment. At last Eleanor needed him again. Lamb would soon face a reckoning. Chapter 12. Eleanor's plaintive call drove Delta towards Fontaine Futuristics, but much flooded ruin still lay between them. As Delta descended in a diving chamber towards the dark ocean floor, his porthole was suddenly cracked by a projectile. Water began pouring in, but Delta was able to seal the breach. Looking out, he spied a Big Sister bounding away along the seabed. The Big Sisters were programmed to prevent Eleanor being taken, and this had been an assassination attempt. Delta knew he would have to face more before reaching his goal. But first, he entered the flooded ballroom of the Adnis Luxury Resort. Spotting glimmering lights below, Delta followed them into a grand, sunken theater, where plaster lions still gazed down nobly through the gloom. Such beauty turned to desolate ruin. This was the fate Sofia Lamb had brought to all of Rapture. Soon Delta would make her answer for the lives she had destroyed, including Eleanor's. But next he had an old friend to meet again. Chapter 13. During the Civil War's height, with bomb blasts and bullets shredding Rapture around them, Delta's highest duty had remained protecting the Little Sisters. Whenever he was alerted to a Little Sister in jeopardy through the genetic bond, Delta would immediately lumber at top speed through raging battles and fiery debris to find the frightened child. Debilitating a Big Daddy gone mad from splicing was unpleasant but necessary if it endangered the girl. Braving showers of masonry and grabbing weapons from fallen combatants, Delta would shield the Little Sister with his massive body until she finished draining Atom from a hidden corpse. Only then would Delta take her small hand and guide her safely back through the war-torn corridors. The smiling, trusting faces of those little girls had kept Delta going through the endless carnage and chaos. He only wished he could have done the same for his own little sister in those dark days, before they were tragically ripped apart. Chapter 14. At last Delta reached the mysterious Persephone Correctional Facility, site of intense genetic and plasmid research, and now home to Lamb's hideous utopian experiments. Descending on a rickety elevator, Delta entered Block E-Wing, finding holding cells and operating rooms littered with mutilated corpses. In cell block F, Delta was ambushed by the rumbling, screeching subject known as the Brute. This bulky monstrosity had been merged with parts extracted from Big Daddy's. The Brute's enraged charge nearly crushed Delta, but quick blasts of incinerate left it roaring in pain. Finally, in solitary wing, Delta uncovered a recording that froze his blood, Eleanor herself speaking in a soulless monotone. "Mother has scheduled my treatment today. She says forgetting my past will allow better focus serving the people." Delta's heart broke at this final proof of the horrific indoctrination forced on Eleanor. All that remained of his innocent little sister was being methodically erased. Delta swore Lamb would personally experience all the torments she had inflicted. The time was fast approaching. Chapter 15. The deeper Delta descended into Persephone, the more memories resurfaced, painting a picture of what he had lost. Visions swam before him of Eleanor dancing carefree with other little sisters, or leading Delta by the hand to proudly show him a new drawing. In sterile experimentation rooms, Delta experienced flashbacks to Persephone's doctors pitilessly conditioning him to be an obedient protector. Through it all, caring for Eleanor had made Delta's servitude bearable, before Sofia Lamb shattered their bond. Delta soon encountered Gilbert Alexander, one of those scientists now horribly spliced into a lumbering, unstable beast. Alexander attacked Delta desperately, but was still no match for Delta's telekinetic hurled projectiles and searing incinerate attacks. Putting the mutated Alexander out of his misery, Delta felt he had symbolically avenged his stolen past. All that remained now was the future, rescuing Eleanor from Lamb's clutches and escaping to the freedom of the ocean's surface high above. Chapter 16. At last Delta fought his way into Fontaine Futuristics, headquarters of the genetic research that had twisted Rapture's populace into monsters. This towering structure reaching towards the ocean's surface had also imprisoned his innocent Eleanor. Battling through laboratories and containment chambers, Delta eventually came upon a holding cell. Peering through the thick glass window, he beheld her at last, Eleanor Lamb, no longer the little girl he remembered, but now a lithe, athletic young woman forced into the role of a big sister. Her piercing eyes widened in shock and recognition behind her armored mask. "Thada, you came for me," Eleanor said softly, her voice tinged with wonder. Delta placed a massive hand against the glass. They had found each other again across nightmare oceans of time and suffering. But their reunion was shattered by the harsh voice of Sofia Lamb echoing from the facility's intercoms. "You will not steal Eleanor from her destiny. She belongs to the people." Alarms blared and splicers converged, howling for Delta's blood. But he calmly turned, readying his weapons. He was at the belly of the beast now, and he would cut his way out or die trying. Eleanor was waiting. Chapter 17. Fighting through hordes of splicers, Delta eventually reached central computing. There he unexpectedly encountered an old ally, the towering form of Subject Sigma, another former Big Daddy now freed from Dr. Suchon's control. Sigma was also seeking someone important from his foggy past. The two bonded protectors wordlessly acknowledged their common purpose. Together they battled through waves of splicers and security robots to reach the facility's core. Over the years, they had both lost so much, but now they would regain what had been stolen from them. In a moment of quiet, Delta and Sigma transacted items from their inventories, as they had long ago during the cooperation period of the Big Daddy bonding trials. Though much had changed, their duty as guardians remained. They parted ways at the core elevator. Their two quests still diverged, but each knew the other would find who they sought. Delta descended into Persephone below, ready for the final confrontation. Chapter 18. As Delta neared the heart of Persephone, Sofia Lamb's disconnected ramblings over the public address system reflected her fractured psyche. Eleanor is our salvation. She will be the first immersed in the coming oneness. Altruism accomplished. The self must die so the people may ascend. You still cling to your individuality, but the righteous path beckons. Delta pitied Lamb in a way. She was the inverse of Ryan. Both had been so focused on their rigid philosophies that they drove Rapture to ruin. But Lamb's was ultimately more insidious, robbing even Eleanor of her selfhood. Delta soon came upon holding cells filled with splicers and political prisoners. All had been methodically conditioned to spout Lamb's beliefs. Happiness will come through unity. I am a thread in the great tapestry. The shepherd must guide the flock. Delta realized Lamb was far gone, but that made her no less dangerous. His defenses ready, Delta prepared to enter the belly of the beast. Chapter 19. Sofia Lamb had not been born a monster. She began as a gifted psychiatrist, hoping to heal Rapture's divisions. But Lamb's own traumatic past seeded her eventual downfall. Her father had been an altruistic psychiatrist back on the surface, administering to the poor. But he was accused of communism during the Red Scare and committed suicide when Lamb was young. The injustice shaped her distrust of the individual. Arriving in Rapture, Lamb witnessed firsthand the suffering caused by unfettered self-interest. The war shattered her faith completely. As Atlas led the lower classes in rebellion, Lamb found her own power. His violence spurred her own. Lamb was utterly convinced of her righteous cause, perfect unity. With Eleanor as vessel, she would erase the individualism that had led to such misery. No sin too great if it led to paradise. But Delta knew that Lamb's utopia was a lie. True happiness came not through sacrificing self, but in bonds between people, as he and Eleanor had once shared before Lamb's monstrous experiments shattered it. Chapter 20. When Delta finally reached Persephone's inner sanctum to free Eleanor, Sofia Lamb's last-ditch effort was unleashing all remaining splicers to descend into a maniacal anarchy. She coldly mused. Their final act will be planting the seeds of our rebirth. From the ashes of their rampage, our unity will bloom. Howling packs of splicers flooded into the facility, crazed beyond reason by atom overdoses. They slaughtered indiscriminately Lamb's personnel, political prisoners, and themselves. Delta fought through the blood-stained corridors, drilling and incinerating the relentless waves. As the demented splicers died laughing around him, Delta felt Lamb's sins coming back upon her tenfold. She had created this madness, and now it would consume her utopia. At last Delta reached Eleanor's inner chamber. But between him and her freedom stood the last line of defense, Sofia's elite big sisters. Delta steeled himself, then charged forward to meet their shrieking blades. Chapter 21. The big sisters proved ferocious foes, their agility allowing them to evade Delta's attacks while darting in to slice with surgical precision. The brawl left Delta seriously wounded. But Eleanor's faith in him kept him standing. After slaying the last big sister, Delta smashed into the final chamber where Sofia Lamb, calmly presided over the raging chaos. She coolly raised a pistol, proclaiming, "Eleanor's destiny as first among the new people will be fulfilled. I would kill 1,000 Deltas to achieve it." Delta replied by telekinetically wrenching away her gun and pulling her into his massive hands. But rather than killing Lamb, he simply tossed her fragile body against a console. She was not worth vengeance, only saving Eleanor mattered now. Suddenly, a white-hot lance of pain pierced Delta's back. Sofia gasped in triumph and shock. Eleanor had run him through. "My daughter, you have done it," Sofia cried joyfully. "Now, lead our people as the first enlightened one." Silence followed until Eleanor's quiet words, "No, mother, I go with my father." Chapter 22. Mortally wounded, Delta stumbled with Eleanor clinging to him into a massive elevator ascending towards Rapture's dark surface far above. As the cold ocean waters enveloped them both, Eleanor anxiously called out, "Hold on, father, almost there." With a last surge of strength, Delta pushed off the sinking city towards the glimmer of sunlight dancing above. But then his body went limp, sinking slowly into the deep. Eleanor swam down and jabbed a harvesting needle into his flesh. "This is your cross to bear, but it is my choice to bear it with you." Suddenly, Delta convulsed back to life. But where his ponderous form had been now swam a lithe big sister. Peering back through his porthole was not Eleanor, but himself. Their minds had been melded by the atom, just as he had once melded to a little sister's to guide her gathering. Now they swam together joyfully towards the surface. Rapture had been a false Eden, but now Delta and Eleanor rose towards possibility once more, ready to live free under the sun. The end.